You must tell me all your secrets. Remember, we must share everything together. Everything.
You've seen all kinds of movies, but you've never seen anything like the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Let's do the time warp again. Let's do the time warp again.
The Rocky Horror Picture Show is wonderfully weird.
I'm your new commander. You now are my prisoner.
They're probably foreigners with ways different than our own.
It's fabulously freaky. It's a trip to transsexual Transylvania. The Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Hello, and you're listening to Girls, Guts, and Giallo. I'm Annie Rose Malamet, and this week I'm going to be talking about the Rocky Horror Picture Show with my friend June. Hi, June.
Hi.
Thank you for coming. Do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm 26 years old. I am a trans woman living in Brooklyn. I'm a writer, and books and like media has been hugely influential on me. I'm definitely more of a reader. I read more than I watch movies, but
That's okay. Well, you're super smart. I haven't known you a long time, but everything that you post on the internet, I always really agree with, and can't wait to read more of your writing. And you were posting about the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is like a landmark queer film. Like, let's be real.
Probably one of the landmark queer films. I was just posting about it today, and I got so many messages from people being like, this was like one of my formative gay experiences.
Oh my God, yeah. I even had a hard time rewatching it because it brought up so many of those feelings of being a queer teenager and watching it for the first time and just feeling like it was an absolute revelation. And I mean, I watched it, I think, the first time when I was I want to say 13, and I already knew I was queer. I didn't know what that meant or to the extent to which I was queer, but it was just super emotional for me because I could, for the first time, really saw androgynous queer people in a joyful way. It wasn't a movie that was about struggle or coming out. It was just this absolute celebration of it. And I just remember feeling wow, I cannot wait for that to be my life. And it was, even rewatching it was emotional because it took me back to that headspace of being that sad queer teenager.
It always takes me back to that headspace. I was also around 13, I think on the dot. I had a one of those casual girlfriends that you date for 3 months or whatever. And I was a cross-dresser for most of my life. So it was a very isolating thing, and coming into my femininity before I could transition and stuff. And I remember that she loved it and I had never seen it. And I was kind of ugh, whatever. Because I associated it with theater kids or something.
Totally.
And, I was not a theater kid. And then we watched it and it was the most amazing thing. And I used to come home from school and watch that movie just by myself, multiple times a week.
Same.
It was so mind-blowing, especially from a perspective of it was 1975, right? that they're, and even when I was like watching movies and growing up, there was no cross-dressing anyone, and there was no gender bending, gender fucking anyone. Everyone was just like, there was not a lot of queer film that was visible. And Rocky Horror is a really interesting example of that. Because Richard O'Brien like is like queer-ish. I think he describes himself as like a third gender type deal, and like we can get into his like messiness later on. But
yeah, well, Richard O'Brien, for people who don't know, wrote the movie. He wrote it mostly in 1970 during 1973. He wrote it one winter just to occupy himself. And then he wrote it as a stage production, and then it got picked up and it became a movie, and it was initially a huge flop. But then it gained like gigantic cult status shortly after that because of the popularity of Pink Flamingos as a midnight movie. And an executive at Fox saw this opportunity and brought it back as a midnight movie. And I remember also when I was in high school watching a special on midnight movies. I was really into midnight movies. I used to go to them a lot. Now I'm like old and I'm in bed already. But I was watching a special on it, and that's how I knew about Rocky Horror, but that's how I learned about Pink Flamingos and like really just bizarre shit like El Topo. And I just became obsessed with that. I would see like they showed like news clips from 1975 of people like outside Rocky Horror dressed up, and it was like people of all different like bodies and gender expressions, and I was just like enthralled and could not wait for that to be me. And I felt like so trapped at that time in my life. So it was just, and like I used to come home and just watch it. Like I had such a deep connection to the characters, to so many of the characters.
It's so mesmerizing.
It really
to watch.
is.
It is truly like one of the most surreal movie watching experiences I think I've ever had, because there's so many layers to everything. There's really great directing choices that are honestly beautiful, and set design, and then there's weird line deliveries that just come out of nowhere, and you're like, how did this make it to the final cut?
Totally.
Weird directing choices, but it's so captivating.
And it's so like referential of so many other things.
Yeah.
And you have to know about to understand it. So like through Rocky Horror, I came to a greater horror love, because I was like, I want to understand what these references are. So I started to, watch the movies that they reference, and I would read a lot about online in 2003, read a lot about about it and what the references were. And then I started going to live shows and the callbacks from the audience. And I started to get into that. I used to like be one of those people that like go like finds the live shows and goes to them. And I just remember it was being so emotional and crying after. This is so corny, but like I literally sobbed the first time that I went to go see it afterwards by myself, because I finally felt for the first time what it was like to be around, not just around gay people, but around a bunch of queer freaks. And I was like, wow, like I had already reconciled with my queerness, but then to also reconcile with my weirdness was like a whole other thing.
It is a whole other coming out, and like being someone who's into like kink and like sadomasochism and BDSM and stuff like that. I associate that like freakiness and the outlandishness and the camp with my own sexuality. And I always tell people it was like I had my like several coming outs throughout the years of like just telling people my sexuality and my gender identity and stuff like that. But one of the ones that really pushed me to the next level was coming out as like a freaky weirdo person and being okay with that. And when I was watching Rocky Horror growing up, I was not okay with that. And Rocky Horror made me feel way more okay with it personally before I could be so open and like not give a fuck that people know that I'm a weirdo. And if people say like, ooh, that's weird that you do that, like now I can be like, yeah, I don't give a fuck what you think. And I like being a weirdo.
Absolutely. Weirdo pride forever. Yeah, now I'm like talking. I'm like, oh, I don't want to edit this. And now I'm like, okay, now I have to pause and I'm going to have to edit it out. I'm going against my own rule. Oh, yeah. So this movie recently, I think since like Laverne Cox was in the Fox production of it. I think it was a Fox production.
It was whatever, I hesitate to believe that a group of humans made this movie because it seems like it was a literal algorithm and a board decision that was like movie make. But this movie was in fact made. You did not forget it. It happened.
Yeah. And
you can't unsee.
I wanted to watch it before we did this, but I just didn't get the chance. But I'm still going to watch it. I mean, Laverne Cox is very beautiful. So she looks like she's really like in just great costumes in it and all that. But yeah, I don't know. I have not heard good things about it, but Rocky Horror in general, I feel like that's when it really started to come under a lot of criticism from the new generation of queers.
Oh, God.
And because
Rocky Horror is transphobic. Haven't you heard?
Yes. People think it's transphobic. They were pissed off that Laverne Cox was cast as somebody who is labeled as a transvestite.
Which is so funny because one of the only redeeming qualities of that Fox production is that they use she, her pronouns for her. And I think that was, I don't know if I like read it in an interview or something, but she like at the table was like, you are not calling me a fucking man.
Yeah.
And like this goes into like queers not wanting to care about history, but I just finished reading today this book called The Stonewall Reader, which is like released by the New York Public Library and under the Penguin Classics imprint. And it is just all like firsthand accounts of people before, during, and after Stonewall. And so you get to see what people were actually saying instead of hearing like what people 50 years later are saying that they said. And getting to actually read Sylvia Rivera talk about the differences between transvestites and transsexuals and all this stuff and transgender people, but how it was all interrelated and they're different stripes of the same community. Transvestite was not necessarily it had a much more powerful slant to it. And just it drives me nuts that people want to just like talk out of their ass and have no concept of like where transgender activism came from. They were called street transvestite action revolutionaries. They had transvestite in the name. It wasn't transphobic. These are the people everyone is talking about. And I'm going on like a tangent.
No, I mean,
I'm sorry.
No, it's a completely relevant and important tangent. I don't even think it's a tangent. Like, I think it's like intimately tied to this. I mean, this is like 1975. So maybe you have better perspective than I do about what was going on with trans rights in 1975. And yeah, like you were saying, it's ahistorical to look at it like it's this, transphobic piece of garbage. I mean, Richard O'Brien himself, like he said he was inspired by glam rock at the time, which allowed him to be himself more, which I think a lot of queer people at the time were very drawn to glam rock.
Oh, glam rock is like the gayest thing ever, but at the same time, it's so fucking straight. Like,
totally.
It depends on like what the band is and like how they're acting, but yeah, the glam rock influence in that movie is very prevalent.
Yeah, and he's come under controversy because in 2009, he expressed that he feels neither male nor female, and he feels like he's a separate gender. I'm still using he, him because that's what he uses. That he feels like he's a completely separate gender. And he came under controversy in 2017 because he said that trans women are not real women, basically. The direct quote was like, "You're in the middle, and there's nothing wrong with that." I certainly wouldn't have taken the wedding tackle off or whatever. He said, "This is a huge jump, and I have all the sympathy in the world for anyone who does it, but you aren't a woman," which is like super fucked up. And
oh yeah, it's
problematic.
fucked up, and I'm mad at him.
Yeah,
and
totally.
It is definitely a betrayal, and it feels much like a betrayal of the source material. Because that movie is such a gender fucky touchstone. I think he even used estrogen for a while. He was on hormones for a while. And I think that's like a case of, you see this a lot with people who have one specific experience and then they want to make it a macro deal where it's like, maybe he didn't feel like a woman. And so because he came to this conclusion on his own, that means that no one else is a woman.
Right.
And that this couldn't be possible. And it's like, okay, that might be your experience. And that's like, okay, that like you tried something and it didn't work out for you. I always advocate for like potential trans people when they come out to me and they're like, I don't know if I am, I don't know what I am. It's like, well, you can try, and if it's not for you, then it's not for you. But it's a whole nother thing to then weaponize your singular experience against the very vast trans community. And it is upsetting, and I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, well, like we don't need to criticize him because like whatever,
Oh, no,
art is
absolutely.
separate from the artist, and like it is, but at the same time, it's like, fuck that dude. But I love this movie.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's like a horrible, horrible thing to say. And like you were saying, it feels like somebody who had an experience and is like, just like you said, projecting that. Or like maybe even somebody who like can't even really go there with themselves and like feels like they have to like, project that onto other people. It's like, I don't even want to psychoanalyze him. It's like it goes against the spirit of like his entire like career, which I think is like part of why it's so upsetting. Yeah, and I just wanted to address that because that is like the thing that he said that is what people use to talk about why this movie is transphobic. But like you were saying, it's partly upsetting because it's so not like the movie or like what the movie is about. The film famously opens with these red lips, disembodied red lips on this black screen, and they zoom in and they start singing with the song Science Fiction double feature. And those are Patricia Quinn's lips, who plays Magenta, and the singing is Richard O'Brien. So immediately we are brought into that playful androgynous space. And that's going to like set the tone for the whole movie. It's so funny. It's even like surreal to talk about this, just dissect it, because this movie is like such a part of the fabric of who I am that it's even like sort of weird to talk about the plot. I'm like, yeah, of course, the lips. It's like,
Yeah. It is very weird to go like plot point by plot point of this movie. Because for me, it's always just been like an experience that I sit down and like the rest of my world completely blinks out of existence, and everything I've ever felt is like pushed to the side, and it's like this movie and the feelings it gives me.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, even writing these notes here was like a weird exercise for me. I'm like, what the fuck even is the plot? Like there's so many just things that happen. Like you said, it's an experience. The song has all these B-movie references. So this movie is like really a celebration of science fiction, B-movies, horror movies. Richard O'Brien was inspired by Hammer films, which are British horror films that came out around this time from the Hammer production company. The cast is introduced, right, in this really great way. And then the first scene of the movie opens with a Christian heterosexual wedding.
Oh yeah. See, this is like it like practically writes itself how like ridiculously on point this movie is with like its messaging of like they start the movie at a wedding, and it's like the like most milquetoast guy with like the most like housewife woman who like they are at the wedding of their friends, and then they two get engaged, and it's like, oh, isn't it so amazing, the American dream?
Yes.
And then at the end of the movie, they are beaten and battered as a fucking castle blasts off into space, and they have smeared makeup all over their faces. They've all just like fucked everyone
All night.
all night, had like the most debaucherous pleasure, and then at the end of the movie they are like facing it, and it's like such a weird downer that like sometimes I'm never prepared for when the ending of the movie comes.
Oh,
and
yeah.
so to bookend it that way, where it starts out with like the heterosexual nuclear family and like bringing in like the state and religion, and also like the that they're like singing in a graveyard, and then they go into the church and the funeral starts. It's like, wow. Oh
yeah,
my God.
right after the wedding. Yes, everything you're saying. You're so good. I love how you articulate things. Like I just got to say that.
Thank you.
And they sing "Damn It, Janet," which is like the funniest song. And Riff Raff and Magenta and Tim Curry are there.
Oh
like,
yeah,
at
yeah.
the wedding.
They are. They played like weirdo like ushers,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. They're like the American Gothic couple with the pitchfork.
Yes.
Yeah. And which I love. It's so funny. And you don't know it when you first see the movie, but it's hard for me to even think about that because I've seen it so many times. Okay.
It's a movie that it improves on multiple watchings because you pick up on stuff like that.
Yes.
And then you start thinking, it's like, are they meant to be the actual Riff Raff and Magenta? No, it couldn't be. But like, why the fuck are they there? Like,
yes.
it's just such a weird thing.
Yeah.
And even I think today when I rewatched the movie, I noticed things I had never noticed before.
Oh, I noticed so much on this rewatch. Tim Curry is the priest.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
he is the priest,
And he's like talking to them and kind of conspiring. So I'm thinking maybe they are supposed to be the characters. Barry Bostwick and Susan Sarandon are like perfectly cast.
Oh, every single person in this movie is cast in the perfect roles.
Yeah.
When he proposes to her, he drops the ring before he can like get it on her hands, and he always does this thing where he like shakes with nervousness, but it's like it's so ham-fisted and it's so cute.
It's perfect.
And she's like basically like fainting all over every set she's on, and it's so amazing.
It's
like,
so funny.
It's overacted, but it's probably the best overacting in history.
Yes, and most of the people in this movie were actually the original cast of the stage show.
Yeah.
Tim Curry was an original cast member. They just Fox insisted that 2 American actors be Janet and Brad. So that's why Barry Bostwick and Susan Sarandon were chosen. So then we meet the criminologist, who's going to guide the narrative of the story. One of the things I noticed on this rewatch was like his cravat is extremely gay. It's like red with like black glitter lace on it.
See, I never noticed that.
Yeah, I had never noticed it in all these years. So Brad and Janet are driving to go see Dr. Scott, Brad's former professor.
This is one of those things about the movie that I sometimes just like don't get. It's like they want like his blessing, kind of.
Yes.
They're like, we need to go see the man who began it, Janet.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why? Like you met
in his
and you
science
got
exhibit. Yeah.
you met in his class, so you have to go celebrate your engagement with him.
Yeah.
It's just like so weird, and it is funny because it does come into play later in the movie, but it's just one of those things that's just like plot convenience.
Yes. As they're driving in the car in the rain, they're fucking listening to Nixon's resignation speech.
Once again, did not realize that, but yeah you're right.
Yeah, it's Nixon's resignation speech, which like people are like, oh, that doesn't make sense. He didn't give that speech at night. And I'm like, but let's think about why they chose that to be in the car. Like these people are like the perfect image of at the time, like and still of like American conservatism and like the perfect, nuclear family, and Nixon, in many ways embodies that. Like those are the people that would have voted for Nixon. Okay. They get a flat tire. Then they see some motorcycles go by too, and they're like, where are all these motorcycles coming from? They get a flat tire, and Janet's like, well, Brad is like, wasn't there a castle all the way back there?
A couple miles, they say.
Yeah, a couple miles back. And they decide to go to this castle, and then they sing the Frankenstein Place, that great song. And Riff Raff has like played by Richard O'Brien, has a great solo in the window of the castle in this song. And
that song always gets me like really emotional.
It's a really emotional song. It's really beautiful.
Very weird emotion, because the rest of the movie is not, even when it's sad, it's not that like somber but hopeful.
Yeah.
And that song is just like an outlier that it serves pretty much like no plot relevance that they sing that song as opposed to like other songs in it. It's just like them walking up to the castle.
Yes. And it's also weird that they call it the Frankenstein Place. Like it sort of makes sense because there's like a sort of kind of like Frankenstein-ish plot in this movie.
It's just like a retelling of Frankenstein, but really gay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right. Riff Raff answers the door. Lightning strikes and like illuminates these motorcycles. So we were like, oh, the motorcycles that's where they were coming from. And then we also meet, Brad says that this place is some kind of a hunting lodge for rich weirdos. And it's
Brad's little quips are so great.
It's so good. And we meet Magenta. She like is almost camouflaged on the stairway, and then she's like, he's lucky, I'm lucky, you're all lucky. So good. And this is when we have the time warp. And my note here is that this party looks like every queer party. Like there's so many different kinds of people at this party, and there's a fat person, and there's just like all kinds of weirdo androgyny going on. Everybody's wearing a suit with full face of makeup. And the time warp, it's not my favorite song in the movie, but it's like
It's not my favorite song either, but it's like it's the first time in the movie that you're like, it takes it to the next level, where it's like, once again, one of those songs that doesn't really have much of a plot relevance. It's not like Hot Patootie, where it's like a song that actually like advances things. It's just kind of them celebrating like who they are, and it kind of prepares you for the weirdness that will then come with the next song, which is really like when things start to kick up. But it definitely like separates like what came before from like, oh, okay, now you're in it.
Yeah, no, you're right. And you're in a warp. Like
It really does. Like it warps you. It's like you just have no idea what you're going on, but you're into it. You're like, so like you want to do the fucking time warp.
Oh my God, I wanted to do it while I was watching the movie. And then we meet Columbia during the song also, who's one of my favorite
is like
characters.
my favorite character too. And I think I will always be upset that she never gets as good of a moment as she does in this song with her tap dance.
Yeah.
Like she has many great moments, and I think that like throughout the movie, like I'm always enjoying watching her, but just like her entire outfit when she does like she like licks her lips at one point, that like bite line where she's like it's like it's fucking incredible.
And when she
no
falls,
wait, that's in
in Sweet Transvestite, but it all it's blending together.
yeah.
She does, though, during her tap dance, there's like a really interesting character development moment where she falls and she's like pissed off about it.
Yeah, and then she like gets back up and just kind of like like flips her hat and like flips her hair and is like, I've got it.
Oh my God, and she's so hot.
Oh, she's so hot.
I was lucky enough when I first saw this movie to have like a group of queer friends already. And we all dressed up as different characters for Halloween from this movie that year. And I was Magenta, and the first girl I ever had sex with was Columbia. Yeah.
This is like the fan fiction of my soul.
Right? My dreams. Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. I mean, Magenta, Frank, and Columbia are like, to me, like my big gay root, like gay femme root. Like the three of them are so hot.
Absolutely. Magenta's like gothic, like maid shtick. And then I was just thinking about this today. So this is like on so many levels, but like as a kinkster, like I've never viewed this movie through the lens of like they are literally like in service to Frank.
Yes.
And like
voluntarily.
Voluntarily, probably because he's really good in bed.
Exactly. Oh my God. Because then we get to the song, Sweet Transvestite. This is when we meet Frank. I just can't say enough about Frank. Like he's so hot. Like this when he says, "I'm not much of a man by the light of day, but by night I'm one hell of a lover."
Once again, it's like you have to realize, and I think a lot of people are fortunate enough to have not come out before a time when Laverne Cox could be on Time magazine and could be cast basically the leading role in a movie on Fox. But there was, for the longest time, absolutely no depictions of trans people in any sort of like widely available movie. And this one is particularly memorable because you don't know how he became this way. You don't know really much ever about who he is as a person other than what you see directly in the movie, which is that like he's hot, he loves dressing like a hot ass slut and looks good doing it, and also has like a vicious streak in him that like if you cross him, he turns into like the most like sadistic top and he will always get what he wants. And then at the same token, he is like pretty much like, you could debate like, oh, he's like bisexual, pansexual, just generalized queer. I think he just likes to fuck so much.
Yes.
And that's like the implication. And I guess some people start to, this is where the problems come in, where people are like, oh, he's a personification of pleasure as like villainy. And that is why him being a transvestite, coded kind of like as a transsexual, is so problematic. But I differ in that, like, for me, like, are you telling me that only like cis people can be villains? Like, I love a good trans villain.
Oh, yes.
And I think this is probably like the best trans villain ever. It's incredible.
Right. And also, like, how many trans people do we ever see still, except like very, very recently, who get to be sexual? Like, a lot of representations are people who are like really suffering and struggling and like.
And that's all like well and good, because suffering and struggle is like the daily experience. But at the same token, it's like you want like a level of escapism, you want a level of variety. Unfortunately, now as trans stories become more palatable for people to tell, you get a lot of these like run-of-the-mill coming out, or like I would say just like coming into their own stories, which is, it just gets so samey. And it's like, it's nice to have different characters doing different things. You never really hear him talk about until the very, very end, like why he wanted to like dress like Fay Wray. And the whole story is not really about his transness or being a transvestite. They just kind of accept it. Like, after Sweet Transvestite, I think it's like 2 more songs maybe, and Janet is like,
They accept it and like worship him.
yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
his lovers worship, like they're like you said, in service to him, like very voluntarily. They like Columbia, I don't know, I mean, it's kind of ambiguous, but like her solo in Time Warp, I think, is about Frank, where she's like, you know, I was walking down the street and like this guy picked me up, and I think she's talking about Frank and like how she came to be part of.
It is very ambiguous.
Yeah. So that's one of, I think that's my all-time favorite song in the movie, Sweet Transvestite. And we learned from that they're from a place called Transsexual Transylvania. I want to live there.
Me too. I like every morning I wake up and I'm like, I'm not in transsexual Transylvania, but how can I make my life more like I am?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, just like every detail, like Frank's outfit, makeup, like the boss tattoo.
The boss tattoo is stunning.
It's everything. Then, you know, he says, come up to the lab and see what's on the slab. And he goes up to his laboratory, and Janet and Brad are stripped by Riff Raff and Magenta. And they're like already obsessed with Frank. They're like,
they're
loving,
enamored.
Yeah,
like they're kind of pissed because they just want to like leave, but they're like, they start getting pulled in. And I think this is where the movie is so poignant with the like American dream kind of like subversion of like like conservatives are fucking perverts.
Right.
And there's all this repression and you give them the little inch and then they start to get pulled in.
Yeah, we're forcing the queer agenda on them in this movie.
Yeah, this movie is literally the queer agenda.
It really
and
is.
the sexual agenda.
Yes. They go up to the lab. Frank gives an amazing speech talking about how he discovered the secret to life, how to make life, how to make a person. And Rocky is born in this it's so fun. There's so many layers here. Like the tank that Rocky is in, when that apparatus comes down and Frank is like moving those little
He's just like
liquid
putting
things.
food coloring
It's
in.
food coloring, but it's a rainbow tank.
Yeah. Oh man, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, and I would have to like double check and see when actually the rainbow started to be used. But that to me, like, that's such a perfect way for Rocky to come into existence. And then he sings the Sword of Damocles. Rocky is born in a gold lame panty and boots, and he sings the Sword of Damocles song. And then Frank sings the song "I Can Make You a Man," which is like a whole just elaborate like Charles Atlas tribute. Like in just 7 days, I can make you a man, which is the Charles Atlas ad. And he gives Rocky these candy cane barbells.
Oh yeah, it's like the gayest fucking movie.
It really is.
It's so and like they have their hands all over each other.
Yes.
They're like Rocky starts like humping that horse
Which is so
Frank,
hot.
Frank starts
Yeah.
humping the horse.
Hot. I was like, do that to me.
Femtop dream.
Yes, seriously, like the hottest. And this like podcast has just become me like ranting about how horny I am for all these movies. But whatever.
Oh, I'm like, this movie makes me so fucking horny.
I was
like
legitimately horny after I watched it.
I will talk about it when we get there, but my favorite part is the floor show, just because of like the costuming and the outfits,
Yes.
and like it made me be like, when is the next time I'm gonna wear like garters?
Yes, right.
And high heels, because for me that's me in my element, and that's me in my sexual element where I'm like, I could take on the fucking world and I could be a star at the floor show.
Yes. Okay, then we get hot patootie.
So then we get fucking Eddie,
Eddie!
This is probably for me like the most fun song
Yeah.
in the movie, where it just like it comes out of nowhere, that like in the middle of a song, quite literally, because then there's the reprise at after this song, you get what is basically 4 minutes of Meatloaf, who is like this metal, like why is he in this movie?
Yeah.
He's this metal musician, but he completely steals the show and then fades away, and his only reference, he gets killed at the end of the song. But he's so fucking hot.
So hot.
And we were talking about this earlier today, but he really is like a fat queer icon.
One of my friends who had also ended up being a dyke was Eddie in during this Halloween.
I had a dyke message me and be like, I was Eddie. I used to play Eddie.
Of course.
And it was incredible.
Of course. And my friend was also fat. And at the time, I think I didn't understand like my connection to this character, but like everything, he busts out of a freezer on a motorcycle singing like with this big gash in his head, this cool as fuck vest that says baby on it on the back and with like leather patches. And it's just like, he's everything. And like, yeah, a fat queer icon. Like,
he's like the leather bad boy of the 50s.
yes, absolutely. And I think like it is ambiguous, but I think we're to assume that like Eddie was also one of Frank's lovers at some point. And
I believe so. this is one of those things where it's like the plot of this movie is pretty irrelevant to the experience.
Right.
But it is implied that Frank is kind of like polyamorous, where he like kind of fucks everyone, and he kind of has like a primary normally, but then moves around. So he goes for like, I think it's like Columbia, then Eddie, and then Eddie is like a fucking crazy person, and Frank's secret to life, it is implied that he took half of Eddie's brain.
Right.
And that's why Eddie has that gash in his head.
Yes.
And so Rocky is just half of Eddie's brain, which is why Rocky's kind of like
Dumb.
so named for the rocks in his head
Yeah.
as Columbia, it
Yeah.
says later in the movie. So he like doesn't really Rocky only ever speaks during the songs, really,
Yes.
or grunts.
Yeah, and then I guess Eddie and Columbia had some kind of relationship, and maybe Frank was like jealous of
Yeah.
their relationship.
So puts him in the freezer.
Yes.
But then he busts out with his motorcycle.
Yeah.
I don't even know how that's possible.
He's like, well, we'll keep the motorcycle with you. And then, like you were saying, Frank kills Eddie with a pickaxe.
Very vicious.
Yeah, very vicious. And then sings the "I Can Make You a Man" reprise, and Rocky and Frank go to their wedding.
Yeah, they like go fuck. And like, once again, I think it's so hard for people to understand what this was like, because it's not just a subtextual relationship. It is very much like we have queer desire.
Oh, it's textual.
And and we are going to our wedding bed on our night, and we just sang a bunch of songs about fucking and how much we love fucking.
Yes.
And like, there's so many homosexual relationships referenced. And there's even an incestual relationship that is heavily implied.
Yes, between
which is
Riff Raff and Magenta.
Riff Raff and Magenta.
Yeah, it's even seeing it in 2003 was a revelation. Like, most queer representation up until very recently has been subtextual, like you were saying.
And a lot of it is still subtextual.
Right.
I'm still like definitely not going to get into it, but there was a show called The Legend of Korra where basically they make the two women get together at the end, but they don't kiss. And then and then they came out and they were like, yes, we meant that to be like them saying their love for each other. But it's like, but why couldn't they even fucking kiss? And so it's like this whole thing. And this was like 2015 or something, you know? So we still have this problem where queer desire is seen as more suspect.
Right.
And more like, you can't show this because people won't buy it and people will picket it and stuff. And it's like, we're in 2019 and we're still dealing with this.
Yes.
This movie had them like, whoa.
Yeah, straight up fucking in a marriage bed. And then we get some more fucking with two of my favorite scenes in the movie, where Brad and Janet are separated into their separate bedrooms, and Riff Raff and Magenta are watching them on a screen, which is hot to me as a voyeur. And Frank comes in dressed as Brad first and seduces Janet. And to me, like, when I saw that as a teen, I registered that immediately as like something really queer. Like, I was just like, ooh, this is doing something for me. Like,
Oh, it gets you going.
yeah, it really does. And just like, I mean, that it's hot when Frank is with everybody, but I especially liked seeing him with a woman, and because I could imagine myself in that position. And then Frank also seduces Brad, dressed as Janet, and which is also a really hot scene. And it's, yeah, I mean, I'm like going off into fantasy land, but
The other thing I want to stress with why these scenes are so iconic is that Frank is a transvestite, and normally transvestite is coded as like meek, submissive, shy, not very sexual or unsure of themselves and shameful. And like some of these things are like really hot and really okay, and you can like eroticize all of these things. Like I am a submissive trans woman who like engages in that way sexually, and that's like where I like to be. But Frank is like a femme top, and he takes control, he seduces, and there is no question about, oh, you're wearing like panties and a corset and high heels. Like you couldn't seduce anyone. You can't like he says it himself. He's one hell of a lover.
And he knows
really must be, because he drives everyone crazy about how good he is.
Yes. I mean, even just the brief glimpses during those like sex scenes, you can see how, I mean, he's just like takes what he wants, and it's hot. Like who among us like does not want to forget about all of that like baggage and shame and just like be like captivated by somebody who just like wants you like so much. And I mean, that's like part of the appeal for a lot of people who are into BDSM, like somebody just like kind of making you experience pleasure. And that's what happens with both of them. Like they're so uptight. They're such uptight people.
Oh, yeah. And they just got engaged less than 24 hours ago.
Right.
And wanted to pledge the rest of their lives to each other and both commit infidelity. And so it brings into question both that system of power and is this really the right way to operate, like sexually, romantically? Like it turns it on its head, and it's like, well, what is it about like monogamy and marriage and commitment that is so captivating to people, especially if it could be so undone by just like one good fuck?
Absolutely. And I also love when Brad says, "What have you done with Janet?" And Frank is like, "Nothing. Why do you think I should?" Also blatantly lying, but it's, oh my God, so hot. Riff Raff has there's like a weird interlude where Riff Raff torments Rocky with these lit candles, and you can see Rocky is chained to the bed, and then he rips off his chains and runs out, and that's when Riff Raff interrupts Frank and Brad and is like, he's escaped, he's roaming the castle grounds. And Frank is like, coming, like mid blowjob. And Janet is like having a moral crisis, and she's like, why did we come here? And she wanders up into the lab and finds Rocky crying. And this is when she has another kind of sexual awakening. And she sings "Touch It, Touch It, Touch Me" and fucks Rocky as Magenta and Columbia have like a kind of lesbian moment as they're watching her on their screen in their room, which is the coolest room ever. Their bedroom.
Oh yeah,
is
their
so
bedroom is great.
Yeah.
And it also has that giant picture of Eddie.
Yeah.
On the wall.
Right.
It's like fucking huge. It takes up the whole wall.
It's huge. I mean, there's just like, this movie is full of like people who aren't typically seen as like hot icons being worshipped, like fat people, trans people. Like, it's amazing in that way. And
Once again, no character ever brings up like, oh, Eddie can't be like a hunk. He's fat.
Right.
Like, it's not even a question. He immediately steals the show when he comes in during Hot Patootie, and everyone, like, even Frank, who like has a history with him, is like kind of like a bit mesmerized for a second, and so are Brad and Janet, who are like just being thrown into this rabbit hole. And there's no, like, no one says he's fat in the movie. He just like is
fat
himself, like doing, like living his best freak life until he dies.
Right.
It's wonderful.
It
and
is wonderful.
she is devastated about it for the rest of the movie.
Yeah. And there's this interesting moment when they have sex, Janet and Rocky, where Janet sees Rocky's face as like all the different people in the movie.
That is another weird directorial choice. It's like creature of the night.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like what?
I mean, I think, Frank sort of like inspired this like sexual awakening in her. And he even says later in the song, Planet Schmanet Janet, when he's like, when we made it, did you hear a bell ring? And it's like, yeah, he like changed her life. Like she was all of a sudden like, I want to be a slut too. And Frank, Dr. Scott shows up, who's like the most boring character in the movie. But he shows up and Frank is like pissed off because he knows Dr. Scott is after him. And Brad is like, oh, that's Dr. Scott. I know him. So
Great Scott!
yes. So Frank is like
Cue
accusing
the
him.
toilet paper flying through the
Yes,
theater.
right. Yes. Frank is like, oh, you know him. You must be conspiring. Dr. Scott enters the house through the Zen room.
The Zen room, one of those like, it's like, what the fuck? Why is this in the movie?
I
But
know.
it's the Zen room. It
Yeah.
just has to be in the movie. And
Yeah.
if you took it out, the movie would lose something.
Yes, the Zen room. And he's like, Frank like turns on this magnet and Dr. Scott is like whooshed into the lab. And this is when Frank finds Rocky and Janet and he's pissed off. And he's like, okay, now we're going to have dinner. Formal wear is optional.
This is like the poly like primary partner shit where it's like you start like it's like so everyone can fuck everyone, but like these two people fucked and now you're like pissed about it for like whatever reason. It's so interesting.
It is interesting. It's like they couldn't quite conceptualize like a full like relationship anarchy scenario.
Yeah.
There had to be like some kind of vestige left over from
Well, because he's like the dom who sets the rules and
Yeah.
they break the rules.
Totally.
Like Rocky had potential, like it's presumed he had never been with anyone else before Frank because he's only been alive for 7 hours.
Yeah. Well, and it's almost like maybe Frank just needs to give permission for people to like get together. Like
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like a weirdo, like the dom sets the rules.
Yeah.
And they're like breaking away.
Right. They have dinner. Dr. Scott has a song about Eddie, Eddie's Teddy. And
Which is probably like I sing along to it, but it's probably one of the worst songs in the movie.
It
It's
is.
just so weird and like I guess it gives you Eddie's backstory a bit, but it just kind of is like it's before Planet Schmanet Janet. Like it's after all this cool shit happened, and the dinner scene is pretty cute. It's actually really funny.
It is. They realize they're eating Eddie. And I mean, some parts of Eddie's Teddy I like
It's
when
a tender subject.
yes, yes. When Dr. Scott is like, from the day she was gone, all he wanted was rock and roll porn and a motorbike, and I'm like, I want that. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. And we just learned that he was like a delinquent, and so he fell in with these delinquent aliens. And then Frank is just pissed and he rips the tablecloth off and we see Eddie's quote unquote corpse.
Yeah, wonderful special effects.
Yeah. Under the table. Janet and Rocky like embrace. Frank is pissed off. And then Frank chases Janet up into the lab singing Planet Schmanet Janet. And he's like tells her like, you're as sensual as a pencil. Like, you need to build your thighs up.
You better wise up,
Yes.
Janet Weiss.
Yes, exactly. And then they're all like defending her, like Brad and Dr. Scott are defending her, which is accurate. Like they got to protect the skinny white cis lady against Frank or whatever. And then he with a device like glues their feet to the floor basically and then turns them into statues Columbia included.
Definitely the weirdest line of the movie by far is "You're a hot dog."
Yes.
And it's funny because it makes sense because his name is Frankenfurter.
Yeah.
But they start singing it and they're like, "You're a hot dog and you better not try to hurt her." Frankfurter. I'm surprised more singing hasn't happened.
I
during
know.
this.
I was like, should we
I don't
be
want
like...
to subject people to like me not being like I can sing, like I'm a singer. I used to actually play some Rocky Horror songs at like
cool.
open mic nights. I used to do
That's
science
great.
fiction double feature.
One of the best
especially
ones.
like in my earlier like cross-dressing days and whatnot. But I don't know. It's like more fun to like talk about it. Like we all know the lyrics. We've all sang it a million times.
Yeah.
But then when Janet's blinks out and it's just like, "You're a hot dog," and it, boom.
And the switch also says Medusa. So they get Medusa'd. Columbia as well because she's like pissed off, upset about Eddie. And then we get the floor show.
My favorite part of the movie, like this is like I cry when I think about it.
Oh, it's so emotional. I mean,
It's the climax. It's
Yeah.
obviously the climax. And that song is just like one big orgasm. It's 3 songs kind of linked together into one song that tell like a complete like 3-act structured story.
yes.
Where you get basically all 4 of the main cast are decked out in garters, heels, corsets. This is how the movie is so weirdo because you could just play this as them in like full beat of like very standard makeup, but they have this like weird white face paint on them, and the makeup is very different, but there's all these female signifying things on them, including Rocky and Brad.
They look great.
And they look great in it. Like Rocky looks so wonderful. He like he humps the boa.
I'm just 7 hours
was
old. Truly beautiful to behold.
But like Columbia's verse in it where she's just like talking about like pleasure. And Rocky he was just born, and so pleasure is kind of like all he's ever known
Yeah.
for his 7 hours that he's been alive. Brad has like this weird like guilt about his mom that he references in the
yeah.
"Help me, mommy,"
And then
which
he's
later he says again in "Don't Dream It, Be It." And then Janet is like, she's complete. And she has gone from like fainting all over the set to like sex goddess. And she feels released. Her confidence has increased. And she is absolutely owning it out of everyone up there. And it's like probably the most transition of any character. Brad is still unsure of himself. Columbia has already like been like this. Rocky is like he's new to it, but Janet is like she wants to fuck and she knows it.
She
now.
knows it. And also in the scene, like feminist is equated with like sexual liberation.
Yeah.
Like, the corsets, the garters, like when Brad is like, I feel sexy. Like it's so beautiful.
And
Like,
usually we run into this problem where androgyny is coded as like male signifying clothing and
Right.
male signifying energy. In queer culture, it's like maleness is seen as the default. But in this movie, it's turned on its head and femininity is the thing that signifies this like gender fucky androgyny, where it's like it's not necessarily drag, it's something different. It really is like onto a world unto its own. It has like burlesque influence, but it also has campy drag, and then it also has like freaky horror show aspects of it. So that part of the song ends, and then you finally get Frank starts to come clean about he had a thing for Fay Wray.
As it clung to her thigh, how I started to cry. 'Cause I wanted to be dressed just the same.
And so then you get like the very it's slow going, and then the orgy begins where they jump into the pool and they are just fucking like
It's the best. It's like a fully pansexual orgy. Like
and you start seeing characters who you haven't seen kiss, like
Yes.
Columbia kisses Brad. I was just seeing today, like I feel like Janet's getting her titties sucked.
yeah.
It's just all out. Like they are all fucking.
Yep.
And it's beautiful.
It really is. And Frank says, "Give yourself over to absolute pleasure," which is a great line. And I fucking love the pool orgy. And then Frank busts out of the pool and he sings,
Wild Untamed Thing.
yes. And then that's when they get interrupted by Riff Raff and Magenta, who are like now in full B-movie sci-fi garb.
And I just want to like, as someone who's like the floor show is my favorite part. Wild and Untamed Thing is like that triumphant feeling after like the best orgasm of your life. It's
Yes.
like it's that like victory of like, yes, this is like pleasure is all worth it. And then they bust in right at like it's taking the wind out of Frank's sails completely.
Oh, yeah, you're right. And we also forgot to mention that Dr. Scott is also in drag.
Dr. Scott is in drag,
Yeah.
and he like doesn't get his like just due, but he from his wheelchair is in garters and heels and
Yeah, living his life.
for the thrills.
Yes, for the thrills. And
Which
that's
is probably the best part of his character.
Yes.
Because the rest of it is very one note. But that part is always like, it's like you see it coming and it's so like, oh, when he lifts his leg.
Yes.
And he, even when they're doing Wild Untamed Thing, he like clacks his heels and
yes,
stuff like that.
across the stage.
So then they bust in.
Yeah,
and
and
the jig is up.
Riff Raff has a weapon that looks like a pitchfork, like he was carrying in the beginning. Like,
But it's a laser.
But it's a laser, yeah. And he's like, "Your lifestyle's too extreme." And then Frank is like, "Let me explain." And then sings, what is that song called? I see blue skies, oh, through the tears in my
I'm
eyes.
going home.
Yeah, I'm going home.
Yeah.
and
I don't know why. Like I was also blanking on the name
Yeah.
for a second. It kind of it's weird because it's technically like the last song. You get Superheroes, and then you get the science fiction double feature reprise. But this is like the last song that's really about like the plot, and Superheroes is like an epilogue, and then like science fiction is like, okay, like you're leaving the theater music.
Right.
So it's very strange. It's kind of like the climax is over, and so Frank gets to kind of explain himself, and it's very like Frank. It's ham-fisted. I think one of the most telling parts of it is like he motions for Columbia to get the spotlight on him, because you need the spotlight when you're at death's door and you are explaining yourself. So there's like the skies project on the back of the curtain, and he envisions these seats are empty, and then he envisions that he is like at basically a show that is sold out and people are celebrating him for how amazing he is as a true narcissist. And it's very touching in that you really do feel for him in this moment, that he is like coming to his end and he's trying to bargain his way out of it before he is killed. But it's really sad. It is very... Song gets me too.
Oh, the ending always gets me. And then when they shoot Frank, and then Rocky carries his body up the RKO tower like King Kong. Fay Wray references, King Kong references. And they shoot him too. And then Dr. Scott is like, "You did the right thing." And I'm like, shut the fuck up, old man.
Fuck you. And what's funny is it's kind of implied. So this is one of the things that's a bit obscured about like through the movie's plot is like, why do they do this? It's kind of implied that Riff Raff is jealous and has kind of been cast to the side, and he has some very latent issues. Like Magenta goes like, "I thought you liked him," which is so funny because it's like you're part of a mutiny, Magenta. Why are you saying that?
I thought you liked him. He liked you. He didn't like me. He never liked me.
Like it's so. So it's personal. They make it seem like it's just
political.
Like, we are done with your utopia of sexuality. We want to go back to our home. And they do reference it to him earlier after Planet Janet. But it is definitely an obscured intention, and you know, even just them like killing Columbia, I was trying to justify it to myself where it's like she was a fanatic and she still was into Frank. So maybe that's why they killed her first, because they knew that she wouldn't take it and she would like attack them or something. But they are really the only ones that like make it out, and they are merciful to the Earthlings. Mm-hmm. And they blast off, and then we get superheroes.
Superheroes makes me cry. Like, it is so emotional, and they're just like on the ground in this mist, this smoke as the castle blasts off and becomes a spaceship, and they're just like you said earlier, like battered and fucked and just like they don't even know like what to do with themselves.
It is essentially like metaphorically what happens the morning after an infidelity and the feelings that go along with it, and the feelings of like isolation, and can we ever really be like two people united and not hurt each other, and what do we do when we do hurt each other, and having to own up to your mistakes and your humanity. And so it's a very short song. It's like a minute, like 30 seconds maybe or something, not even. And funny thing was it used to be cut out of Rocky Horror, including there's a song Once in a While, which is like a deleted scene that like it has no place really in the movie. I think it's like, is it Brad is like lamenting Janet cheating on him or something?
I think it's still in the stage show, but
is it?
Yeah, yeah. I haven't actually seen the scene.
Yeah, it's like a nothing deleted scene. I think I've seen it on the DVD. It's never anything I feel like I need to go back to. But Superheroes now is widely put back in, where you actually get the whole song. It used to just be they blast off and you see them on the ground, and then the criminologist comes in and gives the final monologue. That's basically the end of Superheroes. But with Superheroes, you get to see them crawling out of this mist, and it's really amazing how much like smoke there is and stuff, and you get to see how beaten and battered they are from what they've just gone through and all the things that they have done and experienced and the scars that it has left for them. And you are never given a sufficient closure to their relationship, and how are they able to reconcile it. It is left incredibly open-ended. And I think that's one of like the great tragedies of the movie. And what is also, I want to say what is so great that they never made a sequel, but they did, which is Shock Treatment, which is a whole nother podcast unto itself. For those of you who have not seen Shock Treatment, yes, there is a sequel to Rocky Horror that is made by Richard O'Brien and it carries, technically, you could argue it carries on the plot of the movie, but it like doesn't. And it's pretty much like widely seen as like a bad movie and does not hold up. But there's still like some midnight showings of it. It's definitely, if you're a Rocky Horror fan, I say just like watch it so you can like know what else Richard O'Brien made. And there's like a couple of like gems in that movie. But for all intents and purposes, we do not get closure, and they are left to deal with their infidelity as the criminologist gives the final monologue.
It's a tragic ending.
Yeah.
And, you know, he says some insects, and on the planet's face, some insects called the human race, lost in time, lost in space and meaning. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, this
is the movie that's like a celebration, and it's so happy. And this is probably why they took out superheroes, but I think taking out superheroes just makes it even weirder because you don't really get this lead up to these final few lines that the criminologist delivers. Whereas superheroes, you get to see that all is not right. And yeah, it's I don't want to say that it's a bad choice because it's not. It's brilliant.
Oh, it's really emotional.
It is never. I have seen this movie probably 100 times, and I have never expected. I always expect to be happy after I see it, and I am happy, but I'm never prepared for that emotional beating it gives me. I somehow get mesmerized by the plot of the movie and think it's all going to be okay, and that maybe this time it'll go a little bit further and I'll get to see like some form of closure, maybe even just see Riff Raff and Magenta on Transsexual Transylvania. But it doesn't happen, and so it kind of like takes the floor out from under you.
Yeah. That's like part of why I was like, okay, I'm just not going to watch it until like the day that we record. Cause like it really like makes me really sad afterwards. Like I find the ending really, really sad. And, I don't know. I mean, like maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it's also kind of just like this moment as a queer person, and then especially watching it as a young queer person where it's like the joy is over, the night is over, and like now we have to go back to our regular lives.
It's kind of how I feel like whenever I have a really good night where I go out to like a queer party or like a queer BDSM party and I have an amazing scene. You get this feeling that it's like I never want it to end. But it has to end. Everything has to end.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you go home and you're still on this high. And then you go to sleep and you wake up the next morning and you have to go to work and you feel the drop. You know, it's what people call like sub drop or dom drop.
Oh, yeah.
Or just like mood drop in general.
Yes. And I always experience that really heavily after I do anything and after I do a scene, and or even just like having a drop after having a really amazing queer party, and then like having to go back and be around straight people. And it's
just any queer space, really.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate enough to like be around like a decent amount of like gay people at my job who like I don't have to like hide myself and who I am. Like I can like talk about shit and be like, oh, my girlfriend, or like, oh, blah, 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 gay. Like, and I can talk about these things and it's okay. But even still, it's like a whole nother thing to go to a queer party and to just be like, wow, everyone I'm hanging out right now is either like a woman or a trans person, and we're all really fucking gay, and we're all just like living our best lives. And to leave those spaces is definitely a drop.
And we've created those spaces, kind of like how Frank has like curated this space where he's like completely free, but it has to end for him because, like you said, it can't last forever.
It can't last forever. And that's the tragedy in his character and in the narrative of the show. I'm sure there are many people who could watch this and take away that the message is pleasure is bad. It is a rabbit hole too deep. You cannot get out of it, and it is too alluring. It is like it corrupts absolutely pleasure, and so that it's seen as the demonization of pleasure. But the reality is that Frank's character flaw is he doesn't want it to end. He doesn't want to go back to transsexual Transylvania. He doesn't want to own up to the lives that he has shattered and the people he's hurt, and it is his undoing. And so it's not the pleasure, because Riff Raff and Magenta and Columbia and Brad and Janet and everyone else in the movie enjoys the pleasure. So it's not the pleasure aspect of it that is the great bad guy of the story. It's the inability to own up to your own humanity. And Frank's not really a human, but it still holds water that you need to know when to stop. When I am doing a scene and I'm bottoming, I never want it to end, but I know for me that it's like I have to take responsibility and end things. I can't, as much as I would like to be fucked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I can't live that life. It's not feasible. And it's not responsible. And if you were to live like that, you'll have a hell of a lot of really good pleasure and great sex, but it will all come crashing down and you'll end up at superheroes.
Perfect way to end the discussion. June, thank you so much. You are amazing. I just you came so prepared and
Thank you for having me on. This is honestly my favorite movie, I think, ever. I have many favorite movies, and I'm not like a super movie buff or anything, but getting to talk about someone with this and it has brought me new lenses. Like we were just talking about, Eddie is like a fat queer icon, and all these other things, like the service aspects of it, are just things I have seen this movie a million times, and getting to talk about it with people, I think it's my favorite thing.
Well, yeah, it doing this with you has renewed my love and obsession with this movie. And sometimes I avoid it even for years at a time just because it's so emotional for me. And rewatching it and hearing your perspective on it and things I hadn't thought about, and it's just you always get something new when you watch this movie. You get a new thing from it. And that's the beauty of it and why it continues to be relevant. Even though it's made in 1975 and it's 2019.
I try to watch it once a year.
Yeah.
Even if I don't get to a movie showing, I will watch it around Halloween or something. But it really has brought me so much pleasure and joy to get to share it with other people. And like I said earlier, to know that this movie touched so many people. And regardless of who it came from and how it got made, it has changed the destinies of so many queer people and given us so much to love and fight for, and power within ourselves when we could. I'm going to start crying.
Oh my God, me too. You're going to make me cry. The way you're talking about is so beautiful.
It really is. It gave me the power as a young trans woman when I didn't really know how to even begin the process of coming out, to have something that was my own. And I remember my dad being you like that movie? that's weird. Like it was like it was a thing, and like none of my friends were into it really, for the most part. But it was like it gave me one realm into like a peek into a future, and little would I know that I would have my own little slice of pleasure in the many years to come.
Yes, absolutely. And we're like both living that truth now, which is like really emotional. And like, I just feel so much like love and sympathy for our teen selves. And I just want to like reach back in time and tell those girls like, you're going to have that. Like,
and I can't wait to know where I'm going to be in 5 years watching this movie and seeing how I feel about it then, and seeing what it does to me and my feeling of wanting to reach back to my earlier self. But that movie will always fucking be there.
Yeah. Well, do you want to tell people, if you're okay with it, where to find you on social media?
Yeah. Okay. So my social media is at anarcho_slut. Always funny. I was just like tweeting about this the other day, but people will come up to me at events and be like, "Oh my God, you're anarcho slut."
I know. People are like, "You're fat goth." I'm like, that is true.
And that is my name.
I am fat.
Legally.
I am goth. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, yeah, you could find me there. I'm working on a lot of writing stuff. I'm writing stories and stuff constantly. I should have like said this at the beginning, but I was just so like nervous.
That's totally fine.
I have a story coming out in the next edition of Best Lesbian Erotica.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I can't wait to read it.
It's called My Sweet Femme Nightmare.
Oh my God, June!
And the thing is, don't tell anyone, because I'm not supposed to talk about it. Because I'm still waiting for the okay to talk about it publicly, but I'm doing it anyway because people are like, "Oh, you're a writer. What do you write? What do you write?" And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to be published in this book that comes out like at the end of the year. So don't tell anyone, but I'm going to be in it unless they, through this editorial process, determine that I'm not, in which case you will get it anyway. It just won't be in that.
Well,
collection.
Amazing. Well, I think it says something really cool about my life that I know like 3 women that have been in Best Lesbian Erotica
Yeah.
collections. Like that is so like I'm so my 13-year-old Annie would be so proud. That's amazing. Congrats. I can't wait to read it. You can find me at Girls Guts Jalo on Twitter and Instagram. You can also follow my personal account at FatGawth, FatGawth on Instagram. And you can also donate to my Patreon, patreon.com/girlsgutsandjalo. Please consider looking at it and donating to it. It means a lot to me. It really helps me to do this podcast. And until next time, I'm Annie Rose Malamet, and you're listening to Girls, Guts, and Jalo.
Michael Rainey was ill the day the earth stood still, but he told us where we stand. And Flash Gordon was there in silver underwear. Claude Rains was the invisible man. Then something went wrong for Fay Ray and King Kong. They got caught in a celluloid jam. Then at a deadly pace, it came from outer space. And this is how the message ran.